I'm trying not to make a habit of videos on guitar pedal repairs because sometimes, to be honest, the repairs are quite boring. It's pretty common to do things like swap the switch, swap the pots or the sockets maybe. Doesn't make for that much of an interesting video. But on this particular example, this is a Biyang Tri-Reverb RV-10 Baby Boom as they call it. An interesting thing has just happened. I've just got this and I've just got this out to do a basic test. A 9-volt battery onto a connector plugged into it. The symptom of this was it does nothing, it doesn't power on, no activity at all. But the first thing I noticed was when I connected the battery got red hot. So this seems to have a fault in its power circuit. So I think that might be quite an interesting thing to take a look at. So I thought I'd get the camera rolling and see what we find. Looks like we've got to completely strip this one down. It seems to have two circuit boards stacked on top of each other, so it looks like everything has to come out. Don't forget the set screws. And there we have it. So the first thing that strikes me as a bit unusual is D11 marked here, which I guess would be a protection diode, perhaps for reverse polarity protection. It's just a big piece of jumper wire. There's no diode there at all, it's just a piece of wire. That's a bit weird. But there we can see there are two boards connected by a pair of these quite fine pitch connectors, which seem to be soldered actually. I don't think that removes. I don't think it just pulls out. On the back I can see a couple of 4558 op amps, and every chip seems to be marked, so I'll have to go through this and see what we've got. You can see a little crystal oscillator in the end, so that will be for a microcontroller or a DSP chip, something like that. Of course it's a digital pedal, so it will have probably a basic DSP and just a microcontroller to manage the settings, I guess. Something I'd just like to check is the resistance across the power rail. Dead short. Let's see if that changes with the switch. No, it doesn't. So yep, definitely a dead short circuit. As we see on the continuity test, that would be why the battery was getting hot. Alright, so the plot thickens. Remember this weird piece of wire that was just bridged across the protection diode? Well, it's not going to do a lot of protecting if it allows current to flow either way, unlike a diode obviously. I've removed this, and I did try removing the socket just to see if there was a fault with the switching contacts in the socket. The socket I removed first and it made no difference, but of course when I've removed this little piece of wire, we've now opened this up. This piece of wire was shorted directly between input and ground. So what on earth was going on there? I think this is someone's bodged attempt at a repair. Now, after refitting the socket, let's bring in the meter. You'll notice if you can see that. We've got a resistance between the battery terminals of about 3.5 to 4 meg ohms, which makes a bit more sense than 0.2. So I think someone's attempted to botch repair this. Full disclosure, this pedal was bought really cheaply for a buy it now price as non-working spares or repair, but the description says pedal is completely non-functional. LED doesn't light up at all. Not sure what the issue is. Now that's kind of wide open. He's not saying that he's the original owner, he's not saying that he's not the original owner, but that's been attacked by someone else. You can't just replace a diode with a bit of wire. So surprise surprise, if you can see here, there's a tiny transistor package, 3 pins on the bottom and a ground tab. That's a 78L05 regulator, and I've just measured a dead short between the output side and ground. So it's possible we have a short on this 5 volts regulator on its output side. So I think we're going to have to get the hot air to this to try and get this off. That'll be fun. I've also just noticed, as that was connected, there is a little MOSFET here, and that's got red hot. I was touching my hand, I was like, that's getting hot. So we'll have a look at that little MOSFET as well. That's also, the legs on that haven't been trimmed properly. I wonder if that's also a bodge as well. I think I might pull that MOSFET before I pull this, because that will be easier, and see if it makes any difference to the short on the output of that chip. I gladly proved myself wrong. They are sockets, so that makes this part a hell of a lot easier to get out. Revelation. Just out of trying to make this easier, I removed this capacitor, here, just a through-hole electrolytic, just to try anything to get a little easier access to this regulator to remove it, because measuring across that cap was also dead short. Now that I've removed it and untangled the leads, nothing, wide open. There is no longer a short between input or output. Of course, the central tab is ground, so it will get that. But the short's cleared. And measuring across this, there's now no short, and I think that's probably because the heat, this is often the case with electrolytics, if you heat them up, you can clear fault conditions temporarily. If I try and measure the capacitance of this, it's not actually reading anything. So I think we had a faulty cap all along. I've put that little MOSFET back in. That was quite difficult to get out actually, but I put that little MOSFET back in. So let's see if I have a 100 microfarad at 16 volts or thereabouts. Claims it's a Rubicon as well. I thought they were supposed to be good, but let's find one, put one in. So the only 16s at 100 that I have are these Panasonics, which are a bit tall, so whilst I could put one in briefly to test it, which I will do, I'm going to have to source some shorter ones, because of course there's not that much in it, but they are designed to fit inside the case. I'm sorry I can't get that to focus, I've only got 2 hands. We have power. Intermittent though. So this turned out to be a bit of an ordeal. Remember that part at the beginning where I said a lot of pedal repairs are usually boring, that when you change really boring parts and they don't make for a very good video? Well, here's all the parts that were changed in this. Yes, 2 capacitors and the MOSFET and this mystery piece of wire. It seems that the main cause of all the problems that this had was, of course, this piece of wire that was creating a dead short across the power rail, but that seems to have caused one of the capacitors to go short. And after changing it, I had a voltage drop problem. When it was first lighting up, as soon as I plugged anything in, the light would go out again. I thought it might have been a fault with the jack socket, but it actually turned out to be that the 5 volts from the regulator wasn't 5 volts, it was 4.5. When I plugged the jack in, it dropped to about 3.5. That was happening because the actual input to the 5 volt regulator, which should be directly from the 9 volt battery or power supply, was only coming in at around about 6.5 volts, or 6 volts I think it was. That was because the little MOSFET was actually dropping 3 volts. It should be just switching straight on. This is, if I can read it very carefully just off camera, this is a BS170 MOSFET. I don't have any MOSFETs in my stock. I've only got standard bipolar transistors. What I ended up doing was just replacing it for the moment with just a simple low value resistor, and then we're getting the full 9 volts on the input of the regulator, and of course 5 volts out. And now we have reverb. It works. So it begs the question, with this random little piece of wire just jammed in the spot where the protection diode should have been, the polarity protection diode, what on earth was the original fault? Because what would cause someone to take a protection diode out and jam it with a piece of wire that would just completely short the power rail out? I think that's caused more problems than this must have had in the first place. So that's a really bizarre repair, but it's going. The 2 caps that I've put in at the moment, they're only tacked in, so they're sticking right out, if you can see that, because they're actually too tall for the unit. They would be a little bit too tall to be able to get the case back on. The original ones are these very short. I think they're about 7mm height. So I've had to order some appropriately sized caps. These will be taken out, and when I bolt the whole thing together, of course they'll fit fine. But that was that. So a bit of an ordeal, but we got there in the end. You never know. Sometimes you just get the wackiest repairs, changing the most boring parts.